somebody in need of help. A 15-minute radio program had just started, and he told the boys that he was going to go into the woods, and that if he wasn't back by the time the program ended, they should run down the road to a farmhouse that they had passed and get help. He got out and started directly into the woods, wearing a faded denim-billed cap and carrying machete and 2 flashlights. One of the lights was a spare he carried in his back pocket. He had traveled about 50 yards off the road when he ran into a palmetto thicket, so he stopped and looked for a clear path. But finding none, he started pushing his way through the waist-high tangle of brush. When he stopped, he recalled later, he had first become aware of an odd odor. He couldn't exactly describe it to us, except to say that it was sharp or pungent. It was very faint, actually more like a subconscious awareness at first. Another sensation he recalled after the incident was a very slight difference in temperature, hardly perceivable, like walking by a brick building in the evening after the sun has set. He hadn't thought anything about either the odor or the heat at the time, but later, when they became important, he remembered them. Paying no attention to these sensations then, he pushed on through the brush, looking up occasionally to check the North Star so that he could keep traveling straight east. After struggling through about 30 yards of palmetto undergrowth, he noticed a change in the shadows ahead of him and stopped to shine the flashlight farther ahead of him to find out if he was walking into a clearing or into one of the many ponds that dot that particular Florida area. It was a clearing. The Boy Scouts in the car had been watching the Scoutmaster's progress, since they could see his light bobbing around. Occasionally he would shine it up at a tree or across the landscape for an instant, so they knew where he was in relation to the trees and thickets. They saw him stop at the edge of the open, shadowed area and shine his light ahead of him. The Scoutmaster then told us that when he stopped the second time, he first became consciously aware of the odor and the heat. Both became much more noticeable as he stepped into the clearing. In fact, the heat became almost unbearable, or, as he put it, oppressively moist, making it hard to breathe. He walked a few more paces and suddenly got a horrible feeling that somebody was watching him. He took another step, stopped, and looked up to find the North Star. But he couldn't see the North Star, or any stars. Then he suddenly saw that almost the whole sky was blanked out by a large, dark shape about 30 feet above him. He said that he had stood in this position for several seconds, or minutes, he didn't know how long, because now the feeling of being watched had overcome any power of reasoning he had. He managed to step back a few paces, and apparently got out from under the object because he could see the edge of it silhouetted against the sky. As he backed up, he said, the air became much cooler and fresher, helping him to think more clearly. He shone his light up at the edge of the object and got a quick but good look. It was circular-shaped and slightly concave on the bottom. The surface was smooth and a grayish color. He pointed to a gray linoleum-topped desk in the intelligence officer's room. Just like that, it had a dome in the middle, like a turret. The edge of the saucer-shaped object was thick and had vanes spaced about every foot, like buckets on a turbine wheel. Between each vane was a small opening, like a nozzle. The next reaction that the Scoutmaster recalled was one of fury. He wanted to harm or destroy whatever it was that he saw. All he had was a machete, but he wanted to try to jump up and strike at whatever he was looking at. No sooner did he get this idea than he noticed the shadows on the turret change ever so slightly and heard a sound like the opening of a well-oiled safe door. He froze where he stood and noticed a small ball of red light begin to drift toward him. As it floated down, it expanded into a cloud of red mist. He dropped his fight and machete and put his arms over his face. As the mist enveloped him, he passed out. The Boy Scouts in the car estimated that their scoutmaster had been gone about 5 minutes when they saw him stop at the edge of the clearing, then walk on in. They saw him stop seconds later, hesitate a few more seconds, then shine the light up in the air. They thought he was just looking at the trees again. The next thing they said they saw was a big red ball of fire engulfing him. They saw him fall, so they spilled out of the car and took off down the road toward the farmhouse. The farmer and his wife had a little difficulty getting the story out of the boys, they were so excited. All they could get was something about the boys' scoutmaster being in trouble down the road. The farmer called the Florida State Highway Patrol, who relayed the message to the county sheriff's office. In a few minutes, a deputy sheriff and the local constable arrived. They picked up the scouts and drove to where their car was parked. The scoutmaster had no idea of how long he had been unconscious. He vaguely remembered leaning against a tree, the feeling of wet, dew-covered grass, and suddenly regaining his consciousness. His first reaction was to get out to the highway, so he started to run. About halfway through the palmetto thicket, he saw a car stop on the highway. He ran toward it and found the deputy and constable with the boys. He was so excited he could hardly get his story told coherently. Later, the deputy said that in all his years as a law enforcement officer, he had never seen anyone as scared as the scoutmaster was as he came up out of the ditch beside the road and walked into the glare of the headlights. As soon as he'd told his story, they all went back into the woods, picking their way around the palmetto thicket. The first thing they noticed was the flashlight, still burning, in a clump of grass. Next to it was a place where the grass was flattened down, as if a person had been lying there. They looked around for the extra light that the scoutmaster had been carrying, but it was gone. Later searches for this missing flashlight were equally fruitless. They marked the spot where the crushed grass